right now with meteorologist Mike Seidel, who joins us here in southwest Florida in the Tampa area. Mike.
Hey, Chris. So we're right across from the Tampa airport. It's right behind us. And speaking of the Tampa airport, it's shutting down. No more flights in and out after midnight tonight. Tomorrow, everything is scrubbed. Every airline has canceled all of their flights. And on Wednesday, 60% of the departures have been canceled. The weather will be improving as we go through Wednesday, but right now more than half the flights have been canceled. A lot of things have changed since we talked to you last night from Tampa. First off, we're now under a hurricane warning in the Tampa-St. Pete area. We're also under a storm surge warning. We're expecting 4 to 7 feet of storm surge. That's above normally high ground. Because of that, we've got mandatory evacuations. Hillsborough, our county, Pinellas at St. Pete, also Sarasota, Hernando, Citrus, Pasco, and Manatee. These are all for Zone A, also including low-lying areas and mobile home parks. Will they extend those to B and C? That could happen later tonight and tomorrow as we get closer to landfall, which is expected sometime Wednesday, and likely it's going to be north of here. The worst weather here in the Tampa-St. Pete area, timing-wise, expected tomorrow evening through Wednesday morning. Even through Wednesday afternoon, it'll be gusty, and we'll have those feeder bands on the backside as the storm or hurricane at that point heads up towards Jacksonville. The feeder bands will come in from the southwest. It won't be until Wednesday night and Thursday that the winds calm down and we lose that chance of those gusty, squally thunderstorms. And inland, too, will be impacted. Jackie Jarris checks in from inland, where we go to the University of Florida. Let's go to Gainesville and check in with Jackie.
Preparations are underway here in Gainesville as folks are getting ready for hurricane conditions. We're expecting at least Category 1 winds and very heavy rainfall. Those are going to be the big concerns, even inland. Keep that in mind. Problems with tropical systems aren't just at the coast. They extend far inland, and we are expecting that to continue all throughout northern parts of Florida and then heading up into parts of the Carolinas. Now, power outages will be one of the big concerns, and folks need to be prepared to lose power and have the supplies that they need for at least 3 days. We've been talking with local business owners who say they're going to try and stay open throughout the event to help provide food and a place for people to escape from being into the terrible conditions. Now, we are expecting things to deteriorate starting on Tuesday afternoon, but the peak of the storm will likely be arriving through the day on Wednesday. That's when the strongest of winds and the heaviest of rains should be arriving. A local state of emergency has been put into effect, and the schools have decided to close for Tuesday and Wednesday both, including the University of Florida. Classes are going to be canceled starting at noon on Tuesday and continuing into Wednesday.
And ditto here, Jackie, in the Tampa-St. Pete area. Schools are closed Tuesday and Wednesday. Some of those schools are used for hurricane evacuation shelters. And as far as the peak wind gust, right now, based on our best forecast thinking, we're expecting gusts here in the Tampa Bay area around 60 miles an hour. That could go up, that could go down, depending on how close those bands get to the coast. Obviously, Clearwater Beach may have a higher gust of where we are, about 10 to 15 miles inland. So, Chris, a lot of apprehension. The mandatory evacuation kicked in. Some of the hotels actually asked their residents, the people staying there, to leave immediately. Fortunately, we have some nice hotel management here, and we're able to stay here tonight. We have a new location inland out of the evacuation zone starting tomorrow.
All right, meteorologist Mike Seidel, of course, we will be watching. Thank you for that. And one of the spots likely to see some big impacts is Tampa, and that's where we find meteorologist Mike Seidel, who joins us live right now with, for now, some calm waters behind you, Mike.
Yes, calm and warm. I put my feet in that water today, upper 80s. It's pretty toasty. One thing has changed now. Hurricane warnings are up, storm surge warnings for the entire Tampa Bay area, certainly the coastal areas, and mandatory evacuations in the communities here, including nearby Pinellas County, right here in Hillsborough County. And the mayor of Tampa spoke to those evacuations earlier today and told us that she's concerned about the incoming storm.
in our community today have not experienced that in this particular area. And so we just continue that mantra of please be prepared. And you know that things have changed somewhat with the evacuations. Used to have everyone evacuate immediately from a community, and now we just let them know that you need to run from the water and hide from the wind.
We want to talk about power outages now. We just got this updated map from senior meteorologist Stu Ostro. You can see on the screen the widespread power outage swath, again, from Cedar Key all the way up to Jacksonville. The rest of us, there will be power outages, depend on those peak wind gusts, expecting those in Tampa to be at least 60 miles an hour later tomorrow night. Back here in the Tampa-St. Pete area with a hurricane warning, the storm surge warning, and mandatory evacuations where we're standing in the coastal counties. Generally speaking, Zone A is mandatory. We have some voluntary evacs in some other zones, and they may be adding zones B and C in some of these counties to the mandatory column later tonight or certainly tomorrow as Idalia gets closer. You're looking out across Tampa Bay, the old Tampa Bay, towards the airport. Airport is closing, meaning the flights coming in and out are going to stop at midnight. Everything's canceled tomorrow. Last time I checked on Wednesday, 60% of departures have been canceled, and we'll see if that number goes up. The weather will generally be improving as we go through Wednesday afternoon. Still some squally feeder outer bands coming up here towards the Tampa-St. Pete area. I want to show you what they're doing over at Tampa General Hospital. We mentioned this last night. It's the aqua fence. Pretty cool thing they set up. They were staging it yesterday. They were installing it today. This perimeter around the hospital keeps the surge out and keeps them open and operating. And the mayor of Tampa spoke to that today as far as medical issues as we go through the next couple of days in this area.
That is our Trauma One hospital in the city of Tampa, and it is located on Davis Islands, which is in a flood area. And so they purchased that fencing for the last storm season, so it hasn't been tried out yet. Hopefully, I hope that it's not tried out at all, but we'll see. It's a pretty fascinating approach to a storm surge by Tampa General Hospital.
Well, that's good to have because you want to keep the water out of those hospitals and hopefully keep the power on. That's going to be an issue. We're expecting wind gusts here in the Tampa-St. Pete area based on the current tracking forecast, upwards of 60 miles an hour. That will knock down some trees over power lines and knock up some power. The highest power outages, Chris, we think will be farther up as the center comes in on Wednesday morning north of here. Meanwhile, it's getting close to that 8 o'clock Eastern hour, and I'm seeing at this point, at least on my phone, we haven't got the intermediate advisory, but I'm sure you and Dr. Nab may get it here in the next few minutes.
All right, thank you very much, meteorologist Mike Seidel. We'll let you know as soon as we do. Deteriorating conditions in Tampa, and that's where meteorologist Mike Seidel joins us live from right now. Mike?
Hey, back here on the beach outside of Tampa International, and that airport is going to stop flights in and out at midnight tonight. Tomorrow, the entire schedule's canceled. If you have a flight in and out of Tampa International tomorrow, you probably already know it's been canceled and rescheduled to Wednesday or Thursday. Wednesday right now, just checked, 173 arrivals and departures have been scrubbed, and that is 56% of departures. So just over half the flights scheduled to go out on Wednesday, this is not tomorrow, but Wednesday, have been canceled. Hurricane warnings came out earlier today. We now have the storm surge warning, 4 to 7 feet across the area, but some areas will be hit harder. The idiosyncrasies of this area, it's hard to just say this point. You've got to look at a map and really look closely at a map. But those mandatory evacuations kicked in across these coastal communities this afternoon. And that means if you're in Zone A, you need to head to higher ground. By the way, if you're not in Zone A, B, or C, there's no need to leave Tampa and head to Orlando or to the East Coast because all you have to do is worry about wind and maybe some localized flash flooding. The mayor talked about those evacuations today and how lucky Tampa has been for a long time.
Are although we haven't been hit in a century, we continue to prepare and take these storms very, very seriously. We've put out an emergency order. Shelters are opening, called for evacuations in our lower lying areas, reminding our residents to be prepared and letting them know that we are prepared as a city to meet the needs if, in fact, we are hit by the hurricane.
And let's talk about those power outages, because we will have some here in the Tampa-St. Pete area. We're expecting the worst of the winds tomorrow evening into Wednesday morning. Peak gust up around 60 miles an hour. That's based on the current track and forecast. That could change. Could be stronger, could not be as strong. But when you get up to 60 to 70 mile an hour gusts, that's typically the threshold for some power outages. And you can see that the Tampa-St. Pete area is certainly in the likely category. You can see the red right there. And then you get up to the widespread area, Cedar Key, Crystal River, over towards Gainesville, Jacksonville, and Brunswick, Georgia. So even those inland areas, if you don't get the surge, obviously, you're going to get very strong winds, Chris, and the risk of power going out for at least a day or so in some of these areas where trees go down. We've seen this time and time again. And a point to make is, and Dr. Knabb, and you have made this quite a bit, we're not in the cone here in Tampa. We're not officially in the cone, but these impacts are going to be felt outside the cone. Here, wind gusts to 60, and the surge, 4 to 7 feet. So it goes to show you, don't just look at the cone or the center of the cone, Chris. You got to be concerned, especially outside the cone on the right side of the storm. The other thing is potential for some tornadoes. We've got a Torcon of 3 here tomorrow.
Mike, back to the storm surge, saltwater flooding threat. You said you're close to the airport. With that in mind, how far away would you say you are from the airport? And what do you think the elevation difference is from the airport and where you're standing right now with the water behind you?
It's not much higher. The airport is across the Courtney Campbell Causeway. We're looking back towards the airport. This traffic going that way is going back towards Tampa. The traffic this way is heading out towards Clearwater and Clearwater Beach. We already noticed today 275 north coming out of St. Pete was backed up. So people are already hitting the roadways. I don't know the answer to that question, but I think the airport's going to be okay as far as the surge. But they're concerned about other issues, the wind, and, you know, people getting in and out of the area, because once you leave the airport, you could be in danger. So that's why they've decided that all flights tomorrow are canceled. And good luck getting out Wednesday and Thursday. As I said, there are flights getting out right now on Wednesday. Afternoon gets better progressively.
All right, meteorologist Mike Seidel, thanks so much. And that includes Tampa. And Tampa is where we find meteorologist Mike Seidel. Mike?
And Chris, this evening, as they say, the calm before the storm, that's what we have this evening, just light winds. Temperatures running in the 80s. And everybody is watching us and watching what's going on, because we're not sure exactly where it's going to make landfall and how much it's going to intensify. Based on the forecast, yes, it comes up to a minimal category 3, a major hurricane. One thing that has changed through the afternoon, the mandatory evacuation warnings kicked in. Now, this is primarily Zone A. That's the most vulnerable zones of A, B, and C. Pasco, Citrus County, also Pinellas, and here in Hillsborough counties. And the mayor of Tampa addressed those evacuation orders today.
People in our community today have not experienced that in this particular area. And so we just continue that mantra of please be prepared. And you know that things have changed somewhat with the evacuations. Used to have everyone evacuate immediately from a community, and now we just let them know that you need to run from the water and hide from the wind.
Exactly, a good point. If you're not in A, B, or C, and B and C could be added in certain counties tomorrow to the mandatory evacuation orders. If you're not in one of those zones, there is really no need to leave and drive to the East Coast or drive to Orlando or drive down towards Miami, because it's better just to stay home and stay indoors, stay away from trees and power lines, because inland, that's going to be the biggest issue, the risk of power outages and localized flash flooding, because we expect 3, 4, maybe 5 inches of rain at this point. Even though it's been very, very dry here, it comes down hard and fast enough there will be runoff and there will be roads closed. Certainly tomorrow evening through Wednesday morning, the worst of the weather here in the Tampa-St. Pete area. Continuing coverage live tonight till 1 a.m. Eastern. Stay with the Weather Channel for the latest. Back here in Tampa, hurricane warnings are up. Evacuation orders have been issued for these coastal counties. Zone A, that's the most vulnerable zone. B and C could be added sometime later tonight or certainly on Tuesday. So be aware and get the latest information on those evacuations. Right now, everything is calm, but, you know, things are going to change rapidly as we go through the day on Tuesday. The worst of the weather expected later tomorrow night into Wednesday, when we expect wind gusts to peak out between about 50 and 60 miles an hour. That will include some power outages. Meanwhile, they're prepping over at the General Hospital. That is Tampa General Hospital. They've got the aqua fence. They staged it yesterday. They put this up for Ian, and they now are assembling it. They're putting it together, and it's up for Idalia, which will be bringing the surge in 4 to 7 feet expected, plus or minus based on the exact track intensity and the tides. Meanwhile, today we talked to the mayor about the hospital system and how they're prepping ahead of this potential hurricane.
That is our Trauma One hospital in the city of Tampa, and it is located on Davis Islands, which is in a flood area. And so they purchased that fencing for the last storm season, so it hasn't been tried out yet. Hopefully, I hope that it's not tried out at all, but we'll see. It's a pretty fascinating approach to a storm surge by Tampa General Hospital.
And when we're talking about surge, we have to continue to look at the tides, the high tides, and the moon cycle. There's the moon tonight over Tampa Bay. Full moon coming up on Wednesday, and that's going to occur with high tides Wednesday morning around 4 a.m. and then again Wednesday late afternoon. Those are the high tides that are a concern with that onshore flow, especially Wednesday morning as we get the strongest push of the wind pushing the water into Tampa Bay. From at that point will be Hurricane Idalia, Chris. So the moon makes a big difference. It can increase those tides a little bit, and we'll see how things end up with the surge, the moon, the cycle of the moon, and what ends up happening on this coast. But as you know, the worst surge at this point expected up in the Big Bend of Florida.
All right, meteorologist Mike Seidel, thank you so much.
We want to go to our Mike Seidel, who is in the Tampa Bay area tonight. And, you know, Mike, it's just amazing how important placement can be. When Ian came in, we actually saw a reverse storm surge there in Tampa because the center was just a little to the south. In this case, if the storm center is a little to the north of Tampa, could be just devastating for that region.
Yeah, certainly we're going to have a wind direction onshore, whereas with Ian to the south, the wind went offshore, so that saved them. Although many of the zones last year, A, B, and C, I talked to some hotels today, even Zone C was evacuated. Right now, evacuation Zone A has been evacuated. A mandatory evacuation order has gone out, and they may add B and C. We'll find out what happens tomorrow. In the meantime, behind me is Tampa International Airport in the distance. And I can tell you tomorrow, forget about it. All flights have been canceled. Wednesday now, they've canceled about 175 flights Wednesday, and that includes just under 60% of departures. So things will get better on Wednesday. Tampa has been very, very lucky. You know, Ian went in south. Charlie took the right turn on Friday the 13th, back about 10 years ago. The mayor addressed that today.
Been hit in a century. We continue to prepare and take these storms very, very seriously. We've put out an emergency order. Shelters are opening, called for evacuations in our lower lying areas, reminding our residents to be prepared and letting them know that we are prepared as a city to meet the needs if, in fact, we are hit by the hurricane.
And remember that if you're not in A, B, or C, you don't need to evacuate. You basically, run from the water, hide from the wind. But if you're outside of the evacuation zones, all you need to do is stay indoors, stay away from the wind, which could put down trees on power lines or on top of your car. The other issue you may have inland is flash flooding, depending on how much rain falls in a period of time, because we're going into the storm, Carl, with a 14.5-inch rainfall deficit so far this year. It's very, very dry on this side of the state. And so they can handle certainly a decent amount of rainfall, but if it comes too fast, too furious, it will add up and cause some localized flash flooding. Again, the bottom line is wind gust expected to pick up. Highest wind gusts tomorrow night after midnight into Wednesday morning here in St. Pete and Tampa, looking at 50 to 60 miles an hour, right on the threshold, which could knock out power in this area. So it's going to be a long next about 36 hours or so until we get this thing past us. Luckily, it is moving at a pretty good clip, so it's not going to lollygag and be around here. By Wednesday lunchtime, it's already up. The center is up by Jacksonville.
Mike, I'm wondering if you have any information as to whether or not people are largely heeding these evacuation orders, because we remember with Ian that there were a lot of people who did not evacuate when they were asked to. And, I think part of what went into that is the fact that they hadn't had a storm like that in that region for a very, very long time. They had Charlie, of course, but it was a much smaller storm, not nearly the same level of surge threat. And the same can be said about the Tampa Bay metro area. It's been a long, long time since we've had a storm this strong threatening Tampa. And I wonder if you've noticed whether or not people seem to be heeding those orders.
Well, I can tell you, talking to the locals at Fort Myers Beach the day after Ian, they didn't evacuate because they went through Charlie, which is a Cat 4, but it was a smaller storm, and they didn't have surge issues. Ian was a much bigger storm, and they had 6 to 7 feet of water in their house, and they said, man, we should have evacuated. So every storm is different. As far as the locals, I'm not sure. I haven't had a chance to talk to them. We did see a lot of traffic northbound on 275 coming from St. Pete and Point South earlier, but some of the hotels here today, as soon as the evacuation order came out, 2 p.m. in Hillsborough County, they had the residents, they had to get out. Here, fortunately, we can stay here until tomorrow morning, but they're acting pretty promptly in these hotels. As far as what the locals are doing, we hope they are heeding the warnings, especially in Zone A, and getting out of harm's way, because you just don't know if this hurricane tomorrow makes a jog to the right. It could bring a higher surge than forecast into Tampa Bay, and there are already areas like Gulfport that are extremely vulnerable to surge, whether it's a 4-foot surge or a 7-foot surge. So we'll keep our fingers crossed, hope people heed the warnings. Better safe than sorry, but again, as I mentioned, if you're not in a surge zone, no need to leave. Stay home, stay away from the windows, and just don't drive until it's safe to drive, say later Wednesday or even Thursday.
Yeah, really tricky forecast, Mike, with the angle of the coastline being not all that far away from the angle of approach of this storm. Mike, thank you so much as always, and we'll talk to you again very shortly.
Welcome back to Tampa. I'm meteorologist Mike Seidel, continuing coverage of our upcoming hurricane. It's only a 70-mile-an-hour tropical storm, Idalia, but it's expected to become a hurricane at any time. Our next complete advisory from the Hurricane Center with an updated track comes in about an hour, just before 11 o'clock Eastern time. We'll have it to you. We're live tonight till 1. Starting tomorrow morning, bright and early, we're going to be live around the clock to keep you safe. And speaking of keeping folks safe, there's now a mandatory evacuation for these coastal communities, like here in Hillsborough County, down in St. Pete, Pinellas County, Pasco, Citrus, Hernando counties. That's for evacuation zone A. Carl showed those earlier. And that may be extended tomorrow to B and C, depending on the track. Right now, we're expecting a surge of 4 to 7 feet, and again, it's all subject to change. It may go up some, it may go down some, but the likelihood is highest for the worst surge north of here, up around Cedar Key and around to certainly the eastern part of what we call the Big Bend of Florida, Appalachia Bay. Fortunately, those areas are very underpopulated. I should say not densely populated. But Carl, tonight it's muggy, it's humid, and it's very, I'm very curious to see what happens in the next 12 to 18 hours, because it's all about that jog. When does it start to feel the influence of the steering off to the right? And that really impacts where the highest surge ends up. and what happens downstream on the coast of Georgia and South Carolina. So a lot of anticipation tonight here in Tampa, just how bad it could be.
Yeah, very interesting looking at the trends on satellite tonight, Mike. Mike, I'm wondering where you are there in the Tampa Bay area. Maybe your photo could even widen out a little bit to give us a look at your location. And what is your plan? What are you going to be doing over the next day or so as the storm is getting closer?
Okay, we'll have Rodney Hall, our photog, out here. He's been through many of these over many years. And we're looking back on the causeway. And this is the causeway that goes to Clearwater and Clearwater Beach. And you're looking back towards Tampa. And that's the Tampa International Airport, which I can tell you at midnight tonight, no more flights go out. There may be some international flights that come in after midnight, but no flights tomorrow. Everything has been canceled. Then Wednesday right now, about 60% of departures have been canceled. This is evacuation zone A, as you may suspect. We're right here on the water. So we are going to be checking out at this hotel in the morning and heading a bit inland. We're going to be heading inland into Tampa and an area that's not in the first three evacuation zones, A, B, and C. That's going to keep us safe. We also have a parking garage just in case, but we're going to be far enough inland we don't have to worry about the surge. Again, if you're not in one of those evacuation zones, Carl, as you know, you don't need to evacuate. A lot of folks get on the highway and just drive away from the storm. You don't need to go to Orlando. You don't need to go to Melbourne or Daytona, or certainly south of Daytona, or over towards West Palm or Miami. Stay put. Stay away from the windows. Just stay indoors away from the wind, because if we do get gusts in excess of 60 miles an hour, that can blow trees down and power lines. And how many times, Carl, have we seen where folks go out and they end up losing their life because a tree goes down on their car? Stay indoors until the threat from wind damage diminishes later Wednesday and Wednesday night.
Yeah, run from the water and hide from the wind, Mike. And, you know, it's a little surprising because I know that many of those evacuations are supposed to take place by 7 o'clock tonight, but apparently the tolls have not been lifted across the state until 4 o'clock in the morning. I'm not really sure why that is, and I'm sure they're probably trying to work to figure that out. Mike, thank you so much. We'll talk to you again in just a few minutes, and let's give you the latest. I want to go out to our Mike Seidel right now. He is in Tampa Bay. And Mike, we've had some evacuations ordered already, and a lot of concern about the high water there, because this is such, as we've said many times, such a surge vulnerable section of coastline. I don't know if you've been to the beach in that area, but I went to Reddington Beach years ago, and I was just amazed at how far you can walk out and still be on your feet, and that tells the story about that very shallow continental shelf in that area.
Yeah, what we call the bathymetry of the water all the way up to Cedar Key and in the Big Bend, very susceptible to storm surge. Remember the superstorm in March of '93? We had a 12-foot surge, and that was in the wintertime up in the Big Bend area. So we'll see how it all shakes out. Tonight, we have the mandatory evacuations. I've been watching the Courtney Campbell Causeway. Traffic going away from the camera is coming from Clearwater Beach in Clearwater, and there's certainly not a rush of people, at least at this hour, to get out. But I think many people know that the timing on this, they've got, tomorrow morning and even early tomorrow afternoon to get out of harm's way. So even though the mandatory evacuations kicked in at 2 p.m. here in Hillsborough County, for instance, at our hotel, we can stay overnight tonight. We have to be out by noon tomorrow. Let's talk about preps in the city of Tampa at Tampa General Hospital. And this is the aqua fence. They put it up last year for Ian, and they put it back up today. It surrounds the building, keeps the surge out, keeps the hospital open, which is what we need, because there could be, impacts and folks may end up in the hospital. Let's hope not. And the mayor addressed the safety concerns tonight.
That is our Trauma One hospital in the city of Tampa, and it is located on Davis Islands, which is in a flood area. And so they purchased that fencing for the last storm season, so it hasn't been tried out yet. Hopefully, I hope that it's not tried out at all, but we'll see. It's a pretty fascinating approach to a storm surge by Tampa General Hospital.
Now, what a great idea to keep that hospital open and up and running, as she said, their top trauma center in the area. Meanwhile, tonight, Carl, we await the 11 p.m. forecast. and new track and advisory from the National Hurricane Center, and then the additional what we call 0Z Greenwich time runs from the American Model GFS and the Euro coming up between midnight and 2 a.m. Because it's all about that track and how far north does it go before it makes that turn to the northeast into the coastline of Florida early on Wednesday morning.
Mike, thank you so much. We certainly do appreciate your reporting. We'll talk to you again very soon.
Welcome back to our continuing coverage of Idalia. We'll have the next advisory, the new one, and the updated track here in the next 30 minutes from the National Hurricane Center in Miami. Meanwhile, mandatory evacuations are underway here on these coastal communities, primarily Zone A. That's the most vulnerable zone, and they may push those farther inland to zones B and C on Tuesday. It remains to be seen based on the latest track and forecast. And when Idalia makes that turn to the right, will impact how much surge we get here in the Tampa-St. Pete area. Right now, we're expecting a 4 to 7 foot surge above normally high ground. The mayor addressed the impacts and the preps and talked about safety today on the Weather Channel.
People in our community today have not experienced that in this particular area. And so we just continue that mantra of please be prepared. And you know that things have changed somewhat with the evacuations. Used to have everyone evacuate immediately from a community, and now we just let them know that you need to run from the water and hide from the wind.
Carl or Chris? And again, tonight, the airport is shutting down. We're not going to have any flights in and out of the airport tomorrow. No more flights. They're all canceled tomorrow. Meanwhile, the airport will try to get flights out on Wednesday. About 60% of the departures now have been canceled at Tampa International. And Carl, I think there's going to be a mass flux away from the coast at first light tomorrow morning. We did see a lot of traffic on 275 northbound coming from certainly St. Pete and those areas to the south. But tonight the causeway is relatively quiet, but we do expect a lot of folks hitting the road in the morning. The worst weather here moves in tomorrow evening into Wednesday. That's when we could get gusts in excess of 60 miles an hour, again, depending on the track, how many of those bands get us. It's those tropical rain bands where you get the strongest wind gusts, those squally rains and winds. And if they get farther east than forecast, we could have higher wind gusts and even more power outages.
And Mike, looking at conditions where you are right now, it is 86 degrees. The dew point is an astonishing 79 right now. And so it feels like 100 at 10:30 at night there in Tampa Bay. And that's a big part of why we're so concerned about the high-end potential of this storm, because of all the available energy that's in the Gulf and some of that air is, you know, right over top of you right now.
And also the precipitable water, which is the amount of moisture in the column of air and how much can get squeezed out for rainfall. Now, fortunately, this thing is going to be moving at a pretty good clip, but we're still expecting some areas, and it may not be in Florida, it may be coastal Georgia and South Carolina, that could see double-digit rainfall totals. So, yeah, there's a lot of humidity. I didn't believe it. I can't believe it feels like 100 out here. It doesn't feel that warm. Huh. But if you say it is, I believe you. I trust you. You always have the stats.
Well, it's probably a little breezy there. Maybe that helps out a little bit. You always have a little bit of a wind on the coast there. Mike, thank you so much.
Yeah.
Let's get a look at what's going on with.
Back here live in Tampa, I'm meteorologist Mike Seidel as we continue our coverage until 1 a.m. Eastern. Starting tomorrow morning at 5 a.m., we'll have Jim Cantori live from Cedar Key. And starting at 5 a.m. tomorrow, we'll be going around the clock at least through Wednesday into Thursday. So you know where to tune for the latest from the National Hurricane Center on our expert analysis. We'll have Dr. Rick Knabb, former director of the Hurricane Center, back with us on Tuesday. Meanwhile, here in Tampa, mandatory evacuations kicked in this afternoon. And I think a lot of folks are going to be heading for higher ground, certainly at first light tomorrow. We didn't see a lot of traffic today away from the coast, but we know the worst of the weather is going to hit here tomorrow evening into Wednesday. In fact, some of the highest wind gusts will likely be on Wednesday morning after the storm gets to our latitude and goes by us. Track is not etched in stone. That will determine the exact storm surge here in the Tampa Bay area. Right now, we're looking at 4 to 7 feet. And what we're waiting for right now is the latest advisory, Carl, from the National Hurricane Center. I haven't gotten it on my phone, but sometimes it gets to Atlanta faster via the airwaves. But we'll see if they've upgraded Idalia to a minimal hurricane and also get a new forecast track and see if they adjust that. I'm assuming, Carl, they won't adjust it very much, but every little wiggle left or right, east or west, affects the surge here in Tampa.
Yeah, that is the really big question, and made so much more difficult by the fact that the angle of attack is not terribly different from the angle of the west coast of Florida. So certainly we've got a lot to sort out in the next 24 hours. Mike, thank you.